Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa, the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. And on today's episode, Omari, we are going to talk the Pistons rotations, the Pistons starting lineup, what we've seen from some of the new guys, all of that stuff. But for the first time, we are really going to dive into the 2024 NBA draft. I think we have about 20 games or something like that left here. It's probably time for this. We have plenty of time moving forward, but this is a very interesting draft in terms of the players at the top and just not being a Victor Wembanyama type of prospect at the top, which gives us a bunch of different guys to talk about as we sit here on March 4th. Omari, where are you at right now? I know you're traveling all over the place. Are you in Orlando? Are you in Miami? Where are you at right now?
Yeah, I am in Miami. So it's been a nice weekend of soaking up some sun. Although apparently it's warm in Michigan right now too. So I know it's going to be cold by the time I get back. But, apparently today feels like the first day of spring in Michigan as well. So I'm kind of bummed I'm missing that. But I'm in Miami and then I'm back home day after tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that's I know you're always on the road. I always kind of, is he staying in Orlando? Is he already traveled to Miami? All of those different things. I also have this question, Omari, because this came up as I was teaching today, and I'm not going to sell out my kids, my students, but we looked at their phones and we looked at their screen time because in their English class, they were reading an article about the impact of this and some of that stuff. How much time what is your screen time on your phone outside of like doing work? Like how much time do you think you're spending on TikTok or Snapchat or any of that type of stuff?
It varies on the type of day. Like it would be higher this past week just because of the flights. So like Delta usually has free Wi-Fi now. So I'm usually like on my phone during the flight. And then like, I guess like between like idly scrolling through the day or navigating or whatnot, I probably average about, I'd say 3 or 4 hours. And, if you add in work stuff, like it probably goes up to, maybe 6. But I've been trying to get my screen time down, honestly, because like anything above an hour just sounds like a lot, right? Like excessive. And I just find it hard to pull away, especially with this job. I'd be curious to know what your screen time is, Bryce. I feel like your screen time is probably like crazy low or way lower than you would expect.
So I don't know what crazy low is. Mine was like 3 or 4 hours,
Okay.
which maybe that's it. I was actually, which was way lower than the students. But the thing was, I thought that was a little bit high. An hour of that every day is me listening to a podcast. So like my day starts with me working out in the garage and I just have my phone sitting next to me playing a podcast, the front office or something from The Athletic or a Chiefs podcast or something like that. So really like it's not even that much. And then all of my other screen time is essentially text messages or WhatsApp, like me working and talking and communicating and those type of things. I actually had very, like even Twitter wasn't as high as what I thought it was. And my Twitter engagement has gone down over the last 6 months because of just things that I've gotten busy with. But I have one stupid, silly game I play. That one is up there a couple days, depending on what's going on.
What game?
I
said, what game?
It is called Tower War. Like it's literally the most ridiculous game ever. But I've beat like almost 700 levels. Like this is embarrassing stuff that I've beat this many levels. But it's one of those games. It's super easy to pass the time. It's not, you don't have to like really commit to it or anything like that. So I just pull it up whenever I'm just sitting around with nothing else to do. But I thought that was interesting, especially someone like you that's always traveling. A lot of your job is on your phone, on Twitter, social media. That's a huge part of what you have to do.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I probably average about 7, I would say. Some of that, like you mentioned, you listen to podcasts. Like I play music usually when I'm home a lot. So a lot of that, like I'll just have my phone open like while I'm typing on my laptop because I'm, fast forwarding the song or especially to a new song or whatnot. And all that adds up. So it's like 7 sounds like a lot, but then I think about the times I'm not actively looking at it. The phone is just on and it makes me feel better. But I would like to get mine below 4. That is my goal for this year. And it's really tough during the winter as well. So I'll give myself a little bit of grace.
Wes, while we're finishing up here, drop yours in the private chat if you're willing to do so. But I think I'm pretty good with my phone. My MacBook is always open though. Like that, my screen time on that has got to be crazy because I'm always watching film or doing a podcast or something like that. So we'll get Wes's answer in just a second. But Omari, let's talk Detroit Piston basketball. So since our last recording, well, technically we recorded not technically, we did record right after the win over the Bulls, 105-95. Recorded that with Sean Windsor. Since then, they lost to the Cavs 100-110. They lost to the Magic 91-113. And one of the more disappointing losses, or maybe performances, on Sunday versus the Magic. Maybe you could excuse a loss to the Magic, but that third quarter was rough. We've seen the starting lineup of Cade, Ivy, Asar, Stu, and Duran since Stu has returned from his suspension. We can start there. We can start about that third quarter versus the Magic. Where do you want to start, which is kind of the rotations, the starting lineup, what we've seen from this team since we last recorded?
I think we can dive right into the starting lineup with that Bulls game being the one where Isaiah Stewart came back. So we have, I think now, a 4-game sample size of that lineup. You have Knicks, Bulls. Yeah, you have a 4-game sample size of this lineup, and it started off with a win, but I think every game after has gotten progressively worse for the Pistons, and I think especially against the Magic last night. So it's actually been just 3 games with this lineup, but each game has gotten worse, and you just look at the extent that they were playing off of Asar Thompson, and teams are still kind of whatever as far as defending Stu, and they just couldn't generate anything. And I think that's probably going to be closer to the norm if teams continue to play Asar the way that they did. So, I don't know what your thoughts on this are, Bryce, but I think this lineup coming into it, you expect spacing to maybe be the question mark, and I think we're starting to get the answer that it does not have enough spacing.
Wes says it looks like his is somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5 hours on average. He also doesn't have an iPhone, so I don't know if we can even trust any of this data. So, but I thought we weren't going to get one. I didn't know if Android actually even kept track of this stuff. Like, I don't know how advanced they are. Me and Wes go back and forth. Like, I can't stand the green. But I am against the starting lineup as is. Like, I'm not like going to go over the top. I'm not going to go crazy. I voiced my opinion on Twitter. I voiced my opinion in my post game, raw notes that I put on the Substack now, if you guys want to check that stuff out. I just don't agree with it. Like, I'm sure Monty has his reasons. We've seen it be successful in some capacity. We've seen it be successful defensively. I thought the matchups against the Magic made a lot of sense with that lineup. I just personally don't think Simone Fontecchio is so bad defensively that you can't have him in the starting lineup considering what he provides floor spacing wise. Jalen Duran doesn't space the floor, Omari. Isaiah Stewart hasn't quite got there yet. We've talked about this. It's going to take a whole season of him shooting the way he has for teams to really respect it. And we've talked about the struggle for Asar Thompson, even though he has made some recently, including a big one in that Bulls game. Even if he can just get good from the corners, honestly, Omari, that would be it. I would like to see Simone still in the starting lineup. And quite honestly, I don't care if it's Stu or Asar that aren't in there. I think you probably do have to start one of those because I don't know what the other options would be. But I didn't understand taking Simone out of the starting lineup and feeling like you had to put both Asar and Stu in it. That would be my one quibble with it, is like, I just don't think you had to have both of them. And I thought it made a lot of sense having Fontecchio in with Cade, Ivy, Duran, and one of those other guys. I just thought that made a lot of sense to me.
I will say, I thought the rotation did look really good, or at least from the standpoint of just Fontecchio being the connective tissue in that second unit. I thought it actually looked pretty good during that win against Chicago, where they come out in the fourth quarter and the bench had a really horrible showing in the first half. Then they came out in the second, and Tech had 14 points. I think he had 11 or 14 in the fourth quarter, hit some big threes. And he spent some time with the starters, except Asar, and Asar came in, I think, with 4 minutes left. So you kind of got both versions of the starting lineup in that fourth quarter. And I actually asked Monty about that the next day, if there was any intentionality beyond that. And he just said, honestly, he was just riding Tech because he had the hot hand, and he realized he had played him a quarter and a half, and he just went on ahead and subbed him back out. But I thought there might have been something there where if Tech is maybe more of a, quote unquote, go-to guy for that unit, and then you have enough floor spacing. You have Grimes out there. You've got Sasser, other players who can really stretch the floor, as well as Stu at the five, which we've seen a lot more of the past couple of games. On paper, that seems like a unit that would work, but that just hasn't really happened. We even saw Monty try to trim his rotation down really for the first time all season, since he's had a lot of bodies back yesterday, and even that didn't really work. So I think that probably points to just there being an inherent limit, maybe with the starting five. I know you talked about Asar and Stu. You probably need one or the other, but you don't need both. I think that's kind of where I'm at now, where I think their strengths overlap a bit, and a lot of that to me is matchup dependent. If you're going against a smaller front court, you go with Asar. If it's a bigger front court, like against Boston or Milwaukee or whoever, you could go with Stu. But you do need an additional shooter in that lineup. Cade, Ivy are barely league average. Stu just above league average, not high volume. You just need a little bit more in that unit for sure.
Well, I think what I continue to go back to is I don't think Fontecchio is that bad defensively, Omari. We're not talking about, with all due respect, putting Kevin Knox in the starting lineup because you need theoretical floor spacing. Like, I think I actually even trust Fontecchio more on the offensive end. Like, I think we would all agree he is a better player. And so to me, it just makes sense. You get the floor spacing you need. You still have one, like, even if it is Asar, like, I'm fine with that. Like, make it Asar because he has such that versatility on the defensive end. I'm fine with that. I've been saying I think Stu's ultimate role is as a backup third big anyway. So I don't care which way it goes. And it's not like I have some like, oh my gosh, that like Simone deserves it so much or whatever. And I know some people have brought up the starting qualification. It doesn't change his cap hold that much this offseason, and there better be an extension that happens really quick anyway. If you're going to trade for a guy and give out an asset like they did, you better have that figured out pretty quick. I don't think it only adds 2 or 3 million more to that cap hold when we get to the offseason. So I don't think that should be playing into this either. I just thought it made so much sense. We talked about at the deadline, they make some moves that make sense. And it's just a little bit frustrating now, Omari, because Muscala is gone. Gallo is gone. Fontecchio's not even in the starting lineup. I know Grimes has got off to a little bit of a slow start here offensively, and then he didn't even play on Sunday night. He's probably nursing something here that we probably won't see him every single game. But it just is like, okay, it made sense. It seemed like they kind of had caught on to, we need some floor spacing, all of that. And then they haven't leaned into it. I think that's the frustration. They haven't leaned into it as much as what I thought they were going to when they made the moves.
Yeah, like they were making moves specifically to get spacing, and they acknowledged it on record. We need this. And yeah, you mentioned like you lose Gallo, you lose Muscala, and then you bench Tech for Stu. And defensively, going back to that, I think there were 7 games in between Tech's debut and Stu's return where Tech was starting. And I think he started only 6 of those 7 games, maybe. But even with that, they were like a league average defensive team in that stretch. I want to say they were like 16th or 15th or something like that. And their offense is actually what lagged behind. Their defense was average. Their offense was still below average, which kind of surprised me just because they've been shooting the 3 so much better. But of course, they still had turnover issues as well. But the point, the point there is, essentially that they defended just fine when Tech was on the floor. So with Stu, you get additional rebounding. I think he's probably a more versatile defender just because he's bigger. But are the games you get on defense worth just losing probably your best shooter on the roster just from like a volume and accuracy standpoint? And just what I saw Orlando do to him last night, it wasn't just the lack of spacing. Like there's a lot of issues in that game, especially on defense that really cost Detroit. But I just thought the lack of spacing, that first unit just could not get it going. They had a good stretch in the first quarter, and then they just completely fizzled out. The SAR, I think, had 2 3-point attempts in the first 6 minutes, which typically if he's taking that many that early, that's a sign that your offense is not functioning as intended. I think there's too much skill overlap in that front court. You have 2 road guys for SAR and Stu, not enough shooting. The last few games just kind of show, I think what we figured it would be on paper.
Well, and what I want to point out too is I have a lot of people who say, well, you got to have good defenders there because you got to have those guys to go with Cade, Ivy, and Duren. And I'm just going to kind of leave this hanging here. Think about what that says about Jalen Duren on the defensive end. If you feel like you have to have these big time defenders in the SAR and Stu just to have a somewhat manageable defense. Like that means, and again, he's young, I get it, but he isn't like where he needs to be on the defensive end. If that you just have to have those guys at the wing forward positions. I think Chili Demon says here, bigger issue, Tech needs Cade or Ivy's gravity to do what he does best. Don't think he can be offensive focus of the bench unit. That's a great point. Tech isn't Bojan Bogdanovic or Alec Burks. He functions best when he is getting shots created for him the way Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham can do. And so that leads me into the next thing, Omari, we still haven't seen like major staggering of minutes between Cade and Ivy. They do it a little bit, not as it just makes too much sense to me. Quentin Grimes, Fontecchio, down the roster, almost every one of these guys, probably outside of Sasser and Cade, need somebody to create shots for them. If Cade's going to play 30 minutes a night, 32, whatever it is, Jaden Ivey should be on the floor for the other 16 or 18, and the ball should be in his hands, letting him kind of run the show and create and do what he does best.
No doubt. And we've seen that with the second unit where there are no shot creators. There are play finishers. There are not a lot of play starters. There's no engine for that lineup. And Malachi Flynn did his best. You know, he did his very best to fulfill that role last week, but you just need a little bit more. And, you know, we talked to Monty about staggering Cade and Ivy, and his rationale was just that if you bring Ivy in to start the second quarter and you rest Cade, which is actually what he did, I think, last night. But with that, you're probably going to have a small backcourt with either Sass or Flynn back there. But, of course, you could just play Ivy at the 1 and then have Grimes at the 2, and that kind of solves that issue. So there's just something in his evaluation with Ivy that, you know, I think even with maybe the improvements in his usage this season, there's still a hump there for some reason where he just does not quite want to put Ivy in those positions. And I don't know what it is. It could just be the types of mistakes Ivy makes where you can be pretty careless with the ball. But overall, I just don't think this team has the personnel to hold Ivy accountable in that way. He's been an overall improved offensive player. And like in the modern NBA, there's just no reason that the ball shouldn't be in his hands.
Yeah, and I just think it makes, again, to me, it just makes a lot of sense to stagger those guys. And people will say, well, if you have to stagger them, that means that maybe they don't fit together. No, like they can play together. And guys, not very many players are going to perfectly complement each other to be 100% of their best the way like Jokic and Murray do. It's going to be okay if we only get 90% of what Jaden Ivey can be playing off Cade Cunningham. But that's why then you find minutes to let him be 100% of himself with the ball in his hands a little bit more. I still think it can work. I will say Jaden's taking a little bit too many three-point attempts for me. He's settling a little bit too much. Last thing before we go to break and then get into NBA draft stuff, because we've talked about a lot of these things. I also push back a little bit, Omari, on, well, you just want to start your core guys. Like you need to start Cade, Ivy, Asar, Stu, Duren. Those are your core players. I don't think your quote-unquote core guys, while I do believe all of those guys are kind of in that mold, I don't think they all have to be starters. Yeah. I think Stu is a member of this organization moving forward that helps them win in the playoffs when the time comes. I still don't see him as a starter. I don't think that has to be the case. I don't think your 5 guys all have to be able to play together. Like, if this is your core 5, I don't think this thing's going to work because I don't think there's enough high-end talent for it to work, and it's not going to work together, Omari. There's not enough floor spacing. They are going to have to get a different 3-man, a different 4-man. So I don't really subscribe to that either, that they all have to play together in the same lineup. I have no issues if 1 or 2 of them were coming off the bench, especially if it was putting them in better situations to be successful.
Yeah, I understand just from the standpoint of wanting to get data on how they play with each other and which roles you can put certain guys in. But, you know, as you said, they don't all necessarily need to start, and you're not necessarily putting guys in their best roles by having them start. I always look at it from the standpoint of if the Pistons were a true contending team, you look at rosters like Denver and, you know, Miami, Boston, even like a Golden State, like they've been a lot better. How many players on this team would be rotation guys for those teams? Like not even just starters, rotation guys. If it's starters, is there anyone else besides Cade? You know, maybe Ivy, depending on the backcourt. But, you know, again, and then even beyond that, you know, I think you have Stu. I think you have Tech. You know, I think Asar, you know, he's benefited from being in this type of position, you know, where they can give him a lot of minutes, but the lack of shooting, I think, would hurt him on some teams. And to me, that says you talk about it the in the context of a core four, core five. Ultimately, teams usually just have two guys that they really lock in on. Sometimes you can swing three, but typically it's just two. And I think the Pistons ultimately just need to figure out who those guys are. You could have five guys, but more than likely a couple of those guys are just going to be role players that other players from the outside could potentially fill. So some of this will just work itself out with natural attrition. What I'm getting at is that there's probably not as much value in seeing if those guys fit as it may seem. And if you're seeing the signs that the spacing is just too big of an issue at some point, you just say, we just got to maximize our lineups regardless, right?
Yep, I agree. And let's talk about some potential talent that this team could add over the summer. We know about the cap space. We know about, potentially go out and make a trade, those type of things. But obviously they're going to have a very high draft pick. And we will dive into a bunch of different names, Omari, because right now on March 4th, there are a bunch of different names that could be in play for the Pistons. We'll break it all down after this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're going to dive right into the draft. This is a very unique draft, just in the sense that there's no guy in this draft. There's a handful of players that could go number 1 depending on the pick. And in the past 3 drafts, probably none of these guys go number 1. Maybe there's a debate in 2020, but beyond that, it's just a unique draft. I think this is going to be the type of draft that really shows what your scouting department is made out of.
Yes,
Bryce, you're the draft guru. How, on a scale from 1 to 10, how good is this draft to you? Not just from a top end standpoint, but just an overall depth. This is going to produce this many bona fide NBA player standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, this draft is not what whoever goes number 1, Omari, people will look at and say that's not what a number 1 pick should look like. At the end of the day, that's just where things are at right now. People are not going to be over the moon about getting the number 1 pick, especially when you're coming off a draft that, had Victor Wembanyama. I've said this for a while. I think if you were able to just take 3 guys and put them into the 1, 2, 3 spot, and all of a sudden Alex Sarr was your 4th prospect, and Zachary Risache was your 5th, and Cody Williams your 6th, and I'm obviously going off my board right here, you would feel really good about that. But whenever I tell people that Alex Sarr is my number 1 prospect, and we can start with him if you want, because I think he will be somewhat polarizing for Pistons fans, and rightfully so, I don't think people get excited about that, because I'll read my little, bio on him, my archetype potential role. Defensive-minded big with role and scheme versatility, can be used as the primary defensive big, especially in ball screens, as well as the off-the-ball roamer role. A still raw but interesting offensive game with potential to space the floor. Evan Mobley would be the best comp at this point. Again, comps, guys. I'm not saying he's going to be Evan Mobley, as he does not have the same offensive game as Chet Holmgren or Victor Wembanyama. So you're thinking Evan Mobley, defensive-minded with some offensive limitations. Chet and Victor are on a completely different level offensively than I think Evan Mobley, and then definitely Alex Sarr. So, Omari, I'll kick it back to you. Thoughts on that type of player for this roster in general?
Yeah, I think Alex Sarr is probably on top of my list too. I think he's a good prospect, obviously, but I think along with that, just the archetype of player he is the type of archetype that could probably swing your team the most if you're talking high-end outcomes, and is also the hardest to find, which is just that super switchable, mobile, athletic big who could also add more value on offense beyond just being a pick and roll lob threat. You see flashes of a handle here and there, bringing the ball down the court. You see flashes of some shot making, even though he's not shooting the 3 very well right now. But you see signs of those things, and I think that, along with his age, makes you feel better about him long term, given that he's still 18 now. He doesn't turn 19, I think, until the end of April. So he's a pretty young prospect as well. He does a lot of stuff I like. I think for the Pistons, they've used so much capital on centers that your first instinct is probably absolutely not. Why are we drafting another center? But the reality for the Pistons is that Sarr is probably going to be the most, if they were to draft him, I think he would be their most defensively capable center, potentially from day one. I think a lot of that comes down to Duren's own personal development, but Duren has not been that type of guy yet. And if Sarr is, and you're looking at long-term outcomes, that's a much easier center to build around, I think you look at a guy like Asar, like if Alex Sarr could like space the floor and, you have Asar next to him at the four. Like, I think that's a really unique, really like rangy, mobile front court. A modern front court at that, especially if Asar could develop a little bit more as a shooter. So there's a lot to like Asar for Sarr as a prospect. I think he's maybe a weird fit with the Pistons just because of the draft capital that they've invested into the big positions. But with that, I think a prospect like Sarr is just hard to pass on. To get him on a rookie deal, lock him up to 7 years. If he develops on the current trajectory he's on now, he's going to be a really, really good player.
No, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting as Wes marks all of the comments I'm about to throw up, because it's exactly what we need to get into whenever you talk about Alex Sarr. Because here's the thing. There is an argument to be made that you essentially go down the Cleveland Cavalier path of trying to play these two guys together. You play Sarr and Duren together. I think that Alex Sarr is going to space the floor at some point in his career. But as you said, it's not right now. The last numbers I have, I think these are up to date. By the way, guys, he plays for the Perth Wildcats in the NBL over in Australia. He's a 7'1" big. As you said, Omari, 18 years old, doesn't turn 19 until the end of next month. He was under 30% from three, under 70% from the free throw line. A lot of his offensive stuff outside of just being 7'1" play finisher is flashes and projection. Like, that's what it is with Sarr. Now, I am a guy that tends to believe in it a little bit more. That's why he's number one on my personal board, not the Pistons board. He's number one on my personal board because I kind of buy in to the offensive upside, and then the defensive stuff is crazy. But Doug McMiniman, always got to shout out Doug. Sekou, Killian, Sarr, third time is a charm. Knew that one was coming. Yeah. Steven Suggs says, if you get Sarr, you have to trade Duren. Chili says, would you draft Sarr, trade Duren if you get the number one pick? Way to upgrade the D, and then still have Duren to help get a quality stretch four in the trade. So I have had this pitch to me. I had a Pistons fan kind of send me a DM. I won't out them because I don't know if they're comfortable with it or not. But they said, hey, is the best thing to do here actually drafting Sarr, and then you trade Jalen Duren for a 3-and-D wing, a 3-and-D forward, somebody, what can you get for Jalen Duren? Omari, I have to admit, I don't hate the idea. Like, I really like Alex Sarr. I don't know what you get for Jalen Duren. I'm not saying I would definitely do it, but I think it's something that could be on the table because, as you said, here's the other aspect. If you're going to lock into Jaden Ivey, you end up paying Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren the same year. Now you could push paying that down the road. This would ultimately, for me, come down to what could you actually get for Jalen Duren in a trade? Like, how much can you upgrade that 3 position or that 4 position? If it's not much of an upgrade, if it's not something substantial, then I probably stay with Jalen Duren and then I rock with another guy that we're about to talk about. But if the Pistons fall to like 3 or 4, you all of a sudden get to a point where there's tier breaks here and you end up drafting somebody that's in a lesser tier just to not take Alex Sarr, because this draft could go all sorts of ways. So I think it's something they at least have to have in the back of their mind is, if Sarr is by far the best player on our board when we pick Omari, do we have to take him and then figure it out?
And that's what I was going to get to, is just if the Pistons have a top 3 pick, that's Sarr's range. There's no guaranteed number 1, but I think, like you said, there are tiers beginning to break out, and I think Sarr might be the most solidly top 3 guy just because of all of the unique tools we talked about that he has. And this could become a very real conversation at some point, right? I think Duren showed a lot as a 20-year-old, rookie who's still younger than a lot of a 20-year-old sophomore who's still younger than a lot of rookies, is what I was trying to say. But are you afraid of pulling the plug too quickly on that? Like, he's, really come in and I think endeared himself to the franchise and to the fan base as well. And then along with that, how hot would the trade market be for a guy like that? Anyway, I think that's the trickiest part, because it's one, how many teams need bigs? And then on top of that, how many teams need developmental bigs? And it's just not a very long list, given that Duren hasn't showed some of the things that you'll want to see from a player of his archetype. So that's that's a can of worms. I think that could really ignite a lot of debate. But Sarr absolutely is, to me, the tier player that's worth having those debates for. Because again, if he clicks on defense, I think that sets you up for the next decade.
It's almost like you have to find a team in the Pistons position that needs a developmental big and has a influx of like wings, right? So like the Wizards come up to they have Bilal, they have Kuzma, they have Denny, they have Kispert. But like, are you trading Jalen Duren for Denny Avdia? Like straight up? Like, is that like, that's not what I'm doing. Wes, I'm not. But you know what I mean? So like, I think what Chili says here is the reason I am really, really, really hesitant to sell on Jalen Duren right now. Duren is getting better offensively, not defensively. I know that's kind of a negative, and it is right now. But the fact he has shown this ability to grow because he is just 20 years old or however old, like we've seen major growth in some footwork things offensively this year. Yeah, and so it's like, my thing is, can he then apply that to other areas of his game? This decision would be a whole lot easier for me if they get into it. I know we're all hypotheticals right now, just because it's fun to have these conversations. If it was another year from now where he had 3 years in the league and like you really feel like he's had a chance to show growth defensively. I've seen little things here and there. I was giving him some love, Omari, for like his hand placement and ball screen defense a couple games ago. Well, in this last game on Sunday against the Magic, it wasn't as good. The other thing is, Sarr better be that good defensively if you would be willing to make this type of commitment. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to make this commitment, you better be 100% sure that Alex Sarr is a huge upgrade on the defensive end, let alone what the offense ends up being. So that's another aspect of it. I don't think I'm there yet, but it's an interesting conversation to be had. Especially again, Omari, I think if the Pistons get the number 1 pick, they take the guy we're going to talk about next. I'm just saying if they fall to 5 and let's say Risa Shea, Cody Williams, maybe Rob Dillingham jumps into the top 5 because some team loves the way he can score and, whoever, I don't think Sarr has a great chance of dropping to 5, but at a certain point, you just can't pass up taking that type of talent. So I think it's an interesting conversation in general. We spent a lot of time on Alex Sarr. I didn't intend for that to be, but it's a very fun conversation. The next guy I have is Zachary Richeche. What have you got a chance to watch him at all? Do you have any thoughts? And then I'll kind of read my little blurb on him.
Yeah, my player comparison for him is Cam Johnson. He's just a big wing, can shoot the ball. He has the tools to be a really good defender. And beyond that, I think there's probably a lot of question marks. How good is the handle? How good is the playmaking? He's averaging more turnovers and assists. He's not really a great playmaker right now, but I look at him. He's also a young guy too. Yes. He turns 19 in April as well, so another young guy. His game could grow, but I think if you're talking about guys in that top 3, just from a fit standpoint, I think it's like no brainer him. Just being he's 6'9", 6'10", like he's really tall. He's 6'9". Yep. Big wingspan. I see him as a Cameron Johnson type. I don't know if he's going to be a superstar, but he's going to be a guy who plays 15 years, shoots 40% from 3, has really solid defense, and he's just a guy that every team in the NBA could use. So I'm curious how much your analysis aligns with that.
No, that's spot on with me. 6'9" wing, 18 years old, turns 19 essentially a month from now, averaging 11 points, 3.5 rebounds, assists, a steal, 1.5 turnovers. Remember, for some of these stats, these kids are playing in professional leagues at 18 years old. So that was Sarr. That's Risa Shea. He's only playing 23 minutes a night. These numbers may be a little bit off. This was from a few days ago. Over 50% from the field. He's at 45% from 3. Free throw percentage is at 70%. So I think what really caused Risa Shea to skyrocket up draft boards, Omari, was the defense, like what he does on the defensive end, but the way he has shot the ball. I don't know that people expected him to shoot this well. I will just say, before I read kind of my little archetype role for him, I took him number 1 on the Game Theory pod. Me and Sam did one a couple weeks ago. We did the Tankathon random order. Pistons came up number 1. Again, I have Alex Sarr number 1 on my overall big board. I have Zachary Richeche number 1 on my Pistons specific board. So archetype, potential role, off the ball, 3-and-D wing. I do think he's a wing, not a forward right now. with potential to be a forward as he grows and fills out his body. Does not currently offer a ton of on the ball offensively, but will provide floor spacing and a nice feel for offensive rebounding, cutting, and getting out in transition. Defensively, he may not be a lockdown wing defender, but has potential to be a major value in an overall defensive system with some real versatility long term. May never be the number one scoring option that you may want at the top of a draft, but is that perfect wing archetype that NBA teams covet and need on their roster. So again, it's not your like prototypical number one, but Omari, that sounds like a guy this Pistons team could really use.
No doubt, no doubt. I mean, again, 6'9", long wingspan. He's just the archetype that a lot of teams could use. And you watch his film, and I think he does move well, and that does give you some encouragement that he could add a little bit more to his game going forward. You know, he's not like an elite athlete, but I think he's a plus athlete. You know, I think he runs the floor with long strides. You know, maybe there's some Jeremy Grant there too, you know, especially if he develops on defense, like can develop the handle a little bit more. Like he's just a very easy fit. If you're the Pistons, you're number 3, and like Sarah's already gone. You know, we're probably going to talk about Topic next, and if you're the Pistons, you probably don't have him as high. Like I just think Reese Shea is a no-brainer just because of those reasons.
Yeah, Doug McMiniman asked, can we only trade the pick once the draft has happened? They would have to change the protections, like essentially yes, because the stepping rule comes into play. If they traded the pick before they make it, then they can't let next year's convey the one that they owe to the Knicks. And I know we all like don't think it's going to convey, but that would become a stepping rule issue. Once the pick is made, the stepping rule no longer matters. That's what I've talked about on previous episodes. This team has more firepower to make a big trade if they want to once the selection has happened. So let's say they get the number 1 pick and they draft Alex Sarr. You could trade Alex Sarr, and they would also have access to 2 future first-round picks. I think it's like 28 and 30 or something like that. Maybe it's 29 and 31, but they could do that after they actually make the selection. If they actually sign him, then they would have to wait like 30 days. Like it's happened before. Like we all know that these things can happen. I actually want to talk about Cody Williams first, Omari. So that was going to be my next guy. Some similarities to Reese Shea, other than Cody Williams has some real on-ball potential. Obviously, as many know, he is the brother of Jalen Williams. He is a 6'8" wing at Colorado. He is 19 years old. He turned 19 in November. Again, playing for Colorado. He's 58% from the field, almost 50% from 3 on low volume. Again, another low 70% free throw shooting guy. A lot of people really look at the free throw numbers compared to the 3-point metrics. And then I'll give my quick blurb here, Omari, and then get your thoughts on Cody Williams. Extremely versatile wing who displays qualities to play off the ball offensively, but also possesses the skill to do some things on the ball, or at least as a secondary second side creator. His high feel for the game should make him a nice fit with most teams, as long as the shooting stays consistent on higher volume. Added strength will make him more impactful on both ends, and specifically defensively will expand the versatility of the matchups he can take. Projects to be a real 2-way wing. So thoughts on Cody Williams with the Pistons?
So Cody, again, I mean, he's another guy from a fit standpoint. Just makes a lot of sense for Detroit, being 6'8", big wingspan, young. Like his efficiency this season, outside of the free throws, is really elite. I mean, he's shooting 59% overall from the floor, 45.7 from 3 on only 2 attempts. So that's probably the red flag there. But again, he's just another guy that I'll kind of put in that Cam Johnson mode, just based on what I've seen so far. What gives me some hope, a little bit more hope, is just the fact that Jalen Williams has exceeded all expectations, and he's bigger than his brothers. So obviously, some brothers are similar players, some brothers are completely different ends of the talent spectrum. But I look at Cody Williams and just the way he processes the game. I think he's a very smart player, and that bodes well. I think what I can't figure out is just that outside of his efficiency, the rest of his numbers do not really leap off of the page. He's not an amazing rebounder. He doesn't get a lot of blocks or steals. He doesn't get a lot of assists. I mean, he is averaging 2 a game, but also the same amount of turnovers. I think he reads the floor well. Like, I think there aren't a lot of processing issues for a guy for his height. Like, I think he would move the ball. I just wonder what else he could bring beyond 3-point shooting and defense. And I actually have that question for like a handful of guys in this draft. It seems like a lot of the guys are either just two-dimensional or they bring a lot of things except shooting. But Cody Williams, I just wonder what else he has besides that.
V. Clark says, check out Matas Buzelis. V, we will talk about Matas here in just a little bit. We'll get through these guys a little bit quicker. I think he has good passing and feel for the game. A lot of people coming out of high school really love that about his game. What I like is, again, I think you could put the ball in his hands at times. So let's say we stay with Cade and Ivy, but maybe Cody Williams then is that guy that in the second unit, you stagger him and he can operate some things with that second unit, but he also is very good off the ball, instinctual cutter, offensive rebounder. And then defensively, I saw him take some really tough matchups, smaller guys, bigger guys. He takes a matchup against Isaiah Collier. It's not always perfect, but he takes it. Collier's a different, like he's a bulky guard. I've seen him guard small, twitchy guards. He took Jalen Tyson, who is probably a first-round pick, a strong wing. He had a little trouble in terms of being able to stick with him physically. He has to put on some weight and some muscle, but very intriguing prospect. Again, I would have Risache above him. In real quick here, Omari, just so people know, right now, Detroit, I assume it'd be a coin flip, or maybe they're automatically second, but they're going to end up with the first or second odds. As we all know, that's the same 1 through 4. If they finish with the worst record, they then have a 48% chance of finishing or getting the 5th pick. If they finish with the second worst record, it's 27.8, 27.9 of the 5th pick, or 20% chance of getting the 6th pick. So most likely the lowest the Pistons will fall is 6, but it does open up a lot of potential avenues if they do fall in the lottery again to 5 or 6, and some of these guys are off the board. So let's talk about some of those guys after this short break.
All right, we're going to move on to our final segment, and we're going to race through as many guys as we can to make sure we stay in the time limit. Nikola Topic, he's the latest from the Nikola tree we've seen from the last decade. No relation, of course. I like his game a lot. You know, he's another guy who's really, really efficient. He's shooting about 50% overall. Like, I think his handle's good, his layup package, the angles he could finish, all really, really good. Only shooting 28.2% from 3, but he is shooting 88% at the line as well. I like him a lot. You know, the Pistons don't need a player of his archetype just because you have Cade and Ivy, and I don't know if he's better. I don't think he's better as a prospect than either of those guys, but I also see maybe like a Goran Dragic, like guy who's just an above average starter for years. And I like his game a lot. The Pistons probably do not need to have him very high on the board, but if they did, I would like his game a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he should really be on their board at all, unless you're talking about moving on from Ivy and playing Cade more off the ball. I want to be clear about something. I'm sure people will pull tape and be like, oh, well, Bryce, you said that they should take Scoot Henderson. Scoot Henderson, regardless of what we've seen in his rookie season, was a way better prospect than Nikola Topic. Like, I just want to make that clear. And that's why I made the comment that if you don't get the number 1 pick and you're at 2 or 3, and I think at times we both wavered between Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson anyway because of that wing. And right now it looks like Brandon Miller may have been the better selection, although point guards do take a little bit of time, especially young point guards. I don't think Topic should be anywhere on the Pistons board at all. Yeah. And I really like Topic. He's in my top 5. He might be the best processor in the class. Not a great athlete, some shooting concerns. He is not great defensively at times, doesn't even give great effort. He did jump leagues, played about 3 games, and then got hurt. So I think a lot of hope is that we will see and get some more data on him before the draft playing in that tougher league. Really interesting player. I think he'll go to a team and be a starting point guard for, 6 to 8 years. And if the shot comes around and he's really able to translate his high-level processing, could be a really good player. I don't know that he's a player that we need to spend a lot of time talking about. And maybe we should go like Isaiah Collier. I feel the same way. Omari, he's rising back up boards with his post-injury performances here over the last few weeks. He's been playing a lot better. Rob Dillingham, another guy, like he's not a true point guard, probably not a guy that the Pistons are going to get involved with there whenever you have Cade, Ivy, Sasser, Quentin Grimes. I think you can throw most of those type of guys off the board. Yeah.
What about Reed Shepherd? And he's such a unique player in the sense that he's small, but he's just, to me, so effective in just about every facet of the game that he's probably the one guard in this draft, if you're the Pistons, that you'd have to at least think about it. Like, I'd be curious to see where you fall. I know opinion is all over the board on him, but just his efficiency is off the charts. The block steals for a guard are insane. He's a good passer. To me, he is just a bona fide starter at the very least in the league. And he's the type of guy that could just really pop off. And there's two guys in this draft. We're going to talk to another one later, but he's one of the guys that's just like, is he good enough to where even if you have guards, you're just like, we have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, again, because you kind of have Grimes and Sasser in that second unit now. And it's like, can you play Sasser and Reed Shepherd together? Could you put Reed in the starting lineup? And, this is going to be a debate in general, right? Because, and move Cade to quote unquote the 3. The thing with Reed is, if you're a Pistons fan and they need floor spacing and theoretically defense, I don't think Reed's going to be great on the ball right away, but this kid has amazing hands. He's the best jump shot contesting guard in the draft. Like the amount of block shots he gets, the steals, he's a ball mover. He showed a lot of creation in one of their recent games. So he can play with the ball in his hands a little bit, but he shoots over 50% from 3, Omari, and that's not an exaggeration. The dude is an elite shooter, might be the best shooter in the class. I've watched a ton of his film. He can do it from depth. Like, I don't think there's going to be issues moving to the NBA 3-point line. I mean, I think this is kind of like, hey, the Pistons end up 6. All of these wings are off the board. Sarr is off the board. And you just feel like, because he's not as big as Jacoby Walter, but I've had people throw Jacoby Walter at me as well for the Pistons. And Walter is a little bit more of a 2 guard to me than like a true wing. Like, he's a little bit of more of an off-ball guard than a wing based off what I think his height is. Now, some of this stuff will change. Maybe we get to the combine and Reed is 6'1" and Jacoby is 6'6". Same thing with Ron Holland. I don't think Holland's a great fit because he's not as much of a floor spacer, but I don't think that's not what I would want necessarily coming out of this draft. Even though I think Reed Shepherd is really, really good and I think has a real potential to go in the top 10, if not for sure the lottery in general.
No doubt. Let's talk about Ron Holland. He's one of the G League guys. And, I feel like a lot of those guys have underwhelmed this season, just given how bad the Ignite have been. I don't think any of those guys fit. But Holland has probably been the most productive guy on that team. He's averaging 20 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals on the block, essentially. 46% overall, 24% from 3. And that's, I think, the glaring red flag with him is if he never becomes a shooter, what type of player is he? But I like his game, and I do think he could be the best of those G League guys. His motor is insane. I think his effort, like his want to, his care, like are all really, really high. I think especially for a Pistons team that's had motor issues, I think just adding a guy like that could really help. And he's the type of guy teams look back on like down the road and they kick themselves for not drafting him just because of how physically gifted he is. He's not a perfect fit with the Pistons at all, simply because I think if the jump shot doesn't come around, you really can't have him and Asar on the same roster. Like, that's just too much overlap. But I do like his game a lot. And if he could figure the shooting out, like, I think he could be a top 2 player in this draft pretty easily.
I'm really high on Ron Holland, and maybe as high as anybody in the space. Brandon Ingles says, though, should the Pistons completely stay away from the guys who have shooting question marks? And I think that's where I would land with Ron Holland specifically for the Pistons is I think the form looks okay, but I don't know that he's ever the floor spacer you kind of want to add to this roster, assuming – and this is me working under the assumption you want to rock with this backcourt of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. Like, if that's not what the team wants to do, I think Ron Holland is much more in play. I think he can get a bucket. I think he may be the most explosive player in this draft. One thing that people will find as we get closer, this draft will not have the same level of athletes as last year's class, where we're talking about the Thompson twins and Cam Whitmore and some of those guys. I also think what we're finding in this year's class, Omari, is the G League Ignite guys are going to be very interesting evals. That has been a disaster of a season. There's no true point guard playing down there. And I don't think it's served well for Ron Holland, for Matas, for Tyler Smith, not a guy we'll talk about tonight. Even for Almanza, another guy we probably won't talk about tonight. But I think I'm interested to see if these Ignite guys get a little bit of a bump because people just question the context they were having to play in all year. I really like Holland more than others. He has real defensive like playmaking, and disruption, similar to what the Thompson twins had coming out of OTE, even if some of it needs to be reined in a little bit. Again, probably a little bit lower on my Piston specific board, even though I have him in the top 5 on my personal board.
No doubt. Who should we get to next?
Let's talk about Matas.
Yeah,
I know.
The G League guys.
Yeah, V. Clark asked about Matas, and Matas is really interesting. I think he probably had the rep of being the best shooter in the class preseason. He came out of Sunrise Christian before going to the G League Ignite. He is a 19-year-old, 6'10" wing forward. He turned 19 in October. Averaging 13 points, 6 rebounds. Real quick here too, guys. When you look up the G League guys' stats, make sure you find the overall season stats. So if you go to like Real GM, you have to scroll down because the first thing you'll see is just regular season, and then you'll see G League Showcase Cup. Go to the full season stats, and that's when you get all of that. So again, my numbers may be a little off. I put them in a few days ago. 46% on over 10 field goal attempts. The crazy thing, Omari, with Matas is he's under 30% from 3 on the season right now and under 70% from the free throw line. But another versatile wing, potential forward as his body fills out, that can dribble, pass, and shoot. The player comp that many use, and I know, Wes, you threw this out earlier, is Franz Wagner. I think you threw that out for Cody Williams. Probably a fair high-end archetype for what he can become on the offensive end. Had a major reputation as a three-point shooter out of high school. His feel for the game is better than the negative assist to turnover ratio. Defensively, there are going to be real concerns with the foot speed on ball, but has awesome awareness off the ball, Omari, which could lead to a high-level team defender and even playmaker and disruptor. So this isn't your lockdown, taking number 1 wing forward matchups, but he is a guy that can contribute and be a part of an overall defensive scheme, playing as the low man, contesting, making rotations, those type of things.
Yeah, he's been a tough evaluation for me.
Yes.
One, just because of the mess the Ignite have been this season, but along with that, he just has such an interesting mix of skills. And then you combine that with his build, and I genuinely do not know which aspects are going to translate. One, I do think he's a good instinctive player. I think he reads the game well. I think he could be a plus passer. I think he could be I think he'll be able to defend 4s, like not the bulkier guys like Julius Randle, but the lighter guys. He has that capability. He's a good shot blocker, not a great shooter. He can handle the ball, but not like a lead ball handler type of guy. There's just a lot of he is like a jack of all trades, but master of none. But you combine that with the lack of shooting, and I just have a hard time envisioning what type of player he'll be at the next level. I think on paper, he could be a good fit with the Pistons if he can handle the ball, if he can play, add some value on defense. I think from that standpoint, he makes sense. I just don't know how much I trust that he'll be a plus defender and how much he'll be able to add on offense beyond just I think he has really good touch around the rim. Beyond that, I don't know if he's going to be able to give you any spacing at all. And for me, I think I've kind of knocked him down my draft board a bit.
Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't be in the probably top 2 or 3 for the Pistons specific. I think what's really going to come down to is what do people believe about the shooting. So in high school, he was 43% overall on over 100 attempts, 43% on catch and shoot, 47% on unguarded. And so those are good numbers. It just has not translated. I do know that I think if you look at his more recent games, those numbers are better. So if this guy can shoot in the mid to upper 30s, if you really believe in the jumper, all of a sudden he becomes a true dribble, pass, shoot guy, because I think he can put it on the deck, drive. You talked about the soft touch. I think he can pass a little bit. Again, the on-ball defense is going to be a real concern, but some overall off-the-ball defensive versatility. And that's what, I want to go back to Jacoby Walter a little bit, Omari. Do you have any thoughts on him? Because he is a guy with real potential as a floor spacer, even though the numbers, again, don't stand out as something crazy at Baylor. So he's out of Link Academy, freshman at Baylor this year. He is this kind of prototypical 3-and-D guard wing, and that's where I'm interested to see what he actually measures at, because is he more of an off-the-ball guard or is he a wing? And that will kind of determine for me his fit with the Pistons. But you talk about a guy who theoretically spaces the floor. He can do it off movement a little bit, maybe attack a closeout for a mid-range jumper, and then really plays hard on the defensive end. sounds like something that maybe could be intriguing for the Pistons if they miss out on Reese Shea, Cody Williams, some of those guys.
No doubt. I mean, on paper, again, I think there's a lot to like about his game that would fit the Pistons. The main issue with him is that he came into college with a reputation as a really strong shooter, and that has not been the case. He's been in an extended slump essentially since January. And you look at his numbers on the season now, where he's shooting below 40% overall from the field and then 33% from three. 1/6 attempts, the volume is there, just the percentage isn't. That gives you pause, right? Is there some sort of injury issue? Like, why would a guy who had this track record of being a strong shooter, like, suddenly just forget how to shoot? That's a bit odd to me. Beyond that, like, I do think he plays with really good feel. I like what he can do on defense. And again, like, if the shot comes around, he's a guy that, again, could be a top 3 or 4 guy in this draft just because he has the tools to be a really effective wing. The question for me is this just a weird year for his shooting and he could bounce back next season? A lot of that would be determined, obviously, based on how he shoots it in workouts. But with that, he's also shooting 84% at the line, and he does get to the line as well. So for him, it's not just shooting. I think he could be a really good 3-level scorer. He just has to get to the 3rd level, which is actually knocking down the threes that he's taking.
Yeah, and I believe in the shot. I think it's better than what we've seen. We have 2 more questions I want to get to. So Doug asked, do the Pistons have a 2nd-round pick? Dalton Knecht would be interesting late. I will just say I think Dalton Knecht's a 1st-round pick. Like, I don't think you're getting him in the 2nd round, or if it is, it's at the very top. I have Dalton Knecht way ahead of the 2nd round. We don't need to get into the context of all of that. Just for reference, the Detroit's own 2nd-round pick goes to the Raptors. I believe it was with the Knicks and then got traded in the OG trade. And then the Pistons had that Washington Wizards 2nd-round pick that would be 32nd right now. They moved that for Simone Fontecchio. So right now what the Pistons have in this year in the 2nd round is number 53. So you're looking at a late 2nd-round pick. It'll be one of the last picks in the draft because there's only 58 selections this year because of some forfeits. I'll just throw out some names right now that could be in that area. Trevin Brazil out of Arkansas, toolsy guy, maybe not as much production. Alex Caravan, he may not fall that far. Baylor Shireman, Keyshawn Johnson, Malik Lewis, who plays with Mexico City Capitan, Jalen Bridges at Baylor. Like, there's some guys there. There's some wings. But at this point, guys, it's so speculative because we have no idea who's going to stay in the class and who's not. When we get closer, I think there may be some wings forwards that we could talk about there. But yeah, not quite as interesting of a 2nd round, not having picked 31 or 32 like they could have at one point and being essentially at the very back end of it all. I want to finish with this, Omari. Our guy Derek Brooks over on Twitter says, is another top 5 pick actually overkill at this point? If Cade is our present and future, wouldn't it be nice to pair him with an all-star, not a future all-star, but current? Don't love adding more kids. We've talked about this a little bit, Omari, in terms of, is there room to develop another player, or would they be better off if the trade was right, making a move with whoever they select and go getting somebody a little more established?
Yeah, I'm of the thought that if you can get a really good established player who fits your timeline with that pick, that does make sense, I think, for the reasons listed. With that, I would not say overkill, only because the Pistons have 9 wins, right? Like, if they finish with 15 wins, that would require them to play significantly better over the last 5 weeks than they have so far. So I just think for a team that's played that badly, you need all the draft help you can get. So if you're trading that pick to me, I think you need a bona fide starter back at the very least. But with that, the Pistons are in this weird in-between where they're about to extend Cade, more than likely. You look at Ivy, Duran, those guys are extension eligible next year, and then you add another draft pick to that core, and you're about to have to start paying guys pretty quickly, right? Like, you're about to have some really serious, long-lasting decisions come up in relatively short order here. And adding another young guy could just be a safer option simply because whoever you draft at 5 is going to be way cheaper than whoever you trade that pick for. Sure. And along with that, you still have cap space to go out and swing some other trades for guys. So, I think the Pistons have a lot of avenues. You don't have to trade that 5th pick. And again, a 9-win team, you still need young guys. Like, I know that people are probably tired of being on this draft train, but I just cannot say you have to trade that pick at all costs when you only have 9 wins at this stage.
Yeah, I don't think you have to trade it. You don't have to trade it. I think of all the years, this is the year I think they really need to explore the options of what they could get for it. The thing we
Absolutely.
have to remember, guys, this is widely known as not a great draft, especially at the top. This isn't a bad draft because people hate who you might get at 13 or that prospect isn't as good as maybe who was drafted at 13 last year. This has all come about because people aren't excited about who's going to go number 1 or number 2, number 3. So even if they get the number 1 pick, you may not get the return you would want. And then think if they don't get the number 1 pick, Omari, you fall to 4. Well, now you have to have somebody there that another team is really going to like. So my caveat with that is if you're going to trade it, it's probably with other assets. And then it's like, who are you getting in return? And if it's for a big move that makes a lot of sense, I don't mind it. But I think it's something you want to explore, but I don't think it's something you have to do. This was fun, Omari. We got through a lot of guys, I feel like. I mean, we got through, I think, almost 8, 9. I bet we mentioned 15 guys. We dove, the SAR conversation went a little bit longer just because it does carry over into a bigger topic of Jalen Duren and his defense and can they play together and roster construction and all of that. Risa Shea and some of those guys just make so much more sense. It's a little easier to have those, but it kind of got me excited about what this conversation will be. I mean, that's the thing. If they would have got the number 1 pick last year, it would have been crazy exciting because it's Victor Wembanyama, but we wouldn't have had a whole lot to talk about. Yeah. This year, leading up to the lottery and post-lottery, no matter where that pick falls, Omari, we're going to have a lot of conversations about who's going to be available, who they should take, who fits, who doesn't. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully it's on the back end of a decent stretch here as the Pistons finish off the season in their last 20, 21 games and get some wins and some positivity going into the offseason. So that's all I got on the draft. I don't know if you have anybody else or anything else you want to talk about, or we can be back next week.
Yeah, no, I'll close this out. It's finally draft season. Again, I don't know if interest is as high this year just because there's not that carrot dangling at the very top of it, but just from a pure analysis, which pathway you choose standpoint, this is probably the deepest draft that we've had since we've done the Pistons Pulse. I think this will be our 3rd draft. We'll probably have more to talk about in this draft than we did last year and the year before for sure. So I'm excited to continue to dive into these guys. I'm excited to bring some guests on, as we always do, to learn more. And we hope you guys continue to tune in with us. So with that, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, big shout out to Wes as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.